Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and a bit of Monster Hunter Wilds talk. Over this month of January, we've learned a lot about Wilds from IGN and their special January month of coverage. They had some sort of agreement where they had a lot of unique early access, and from that we've heard interviews, gameplays, and a lot of big reveals. My goal with this video is to put together the bigger reveals, details, and topics, as well as just stuff I found cool or interesting, all into one video. But in large part, we have covered a lot of these topics and reveals in greater detail with their own videos throughout January, so if you want to learn more about anything, go check out those videos. But with that said, let's begin. Back on January 7th, that's when we really got started with some big reveals for Rompopolo, an Ajarakan gameplay, as well as a first real gameplay look at the Well Basin. There was fresh gameplay footage though in both English and Japanese versions for the respective IGN channels, so we got to see maybe more than we otherwise would have seen if it was just one or the other. Just some of the favorite things I saw from Rompopolo to quickly cover it then. It is indeed a new brute wyvern, and we have had a look at its armor set before, but we never really got to see the true detail of it, like the fact that it has these overly large, huge, inflating sacs of this explosive poison across its head, back, and tail, and these seem to be destructible in different ways. For example, when you deal enough damage to all of these different sacs, you can get it into that deflated form. That's the first time we saw it. A lot of people found this disgusting, but also very lovable, I guess in a similar way to the way people feel about Kezu. And from the gameplay, we saw there's quite a lot of downtime when it uses those big explosive attacks, where it sticks the tail into the ground to smash out big AoE. So if you can avoid those attacks and get close, those are going to be great punish windows, it would seem. We also got a look at the Palico armor set for the first time for Rompopolo, which looks nice and goofy and silly. This little suit where it's like underwater or something, but then it's this submerged brain in the helmet like a jar. In Rompopolo's gameplay, we also surprisingly got a reveal of Uthuna's heavy bowgun, which is quite big, looking like the big whale herself, with fins along the side, very floaty. And a little subtle detail we saw was the chill mantle bug on the side of the screen but never directly used, so we are wondering if that's like a temporary buff while you're in the oil well, since it is a hot environment. But you know, mantles are back, as we saw of course with the ghillie in the beta, and then as we'll talk about later, we also saw one of the NPC companions wearing rock steady mantle. So with it being called a chill mantle, I'm wondering if it's going to be like a cloak that you can put on for a period. On the other hand, we had the Ajarakan hunt, of course. This is a new fanged beast with a huge shell across its back that lights up when it enrages because it is a fire monster. The biggest thing we saw from this is easily this Beyblade ultimate attack where it kind of corkscrews into the ground, heating itself up, leaping down and slamming in a big explosive hit. It looks very silly, unlike the monster itself, which is certainly very serious. We saw some cool stuff to do with its movement, like it swings in certain areas where these horizontal pillars are above, only in certain places such as its nest, but interestingly you can interrupt what it's doing when it's swinging, causing it to be knocked down and leaving it vulnerable as an option, it would seem. In terms of design for this monster, we know that they wanted to create one that's a bit more unique than the other fanged beasts. So for example, it's a lot more top heavy and looming compared to the more eye level fanged beasts they've talked about or designed in the past. Further, when it's heated up and enraged, the idea is that it's emanating this intense heat. So for example, with its hug grab attack, it's just kind of holding you and you're burning because of that. We also did get a look at the amazing armor set for the hunter with Ajarakan. It has these kind of shoulder pads that come up over the side of each shoulder and connect over your head, much like the shell on his back like the monster. But yeah, just a really cool armor set design. Now for the Well Basin as a locale and the reveals there, we do learn a spree of different things throughout all of January, but it was only a couple teasers here that we could talk about. Like for example in Area 10, we saw this new thing called the Oil Silt Spout, a new environmental trap we can trigger by using different combustibles, such as what we saw with the torch pods being used to ignite it for a big explosion. But we also saw in the area something called Spark Flint, which might work as well, and some weapons do have some fiery nature to them, so I wonder if that could trigger it too. In regards to the new small monsters on this locale, we did have the names revealed for these, Gelodron and Canodath. The Gelodron appears to be that new purple amphibian, the slow-moving, chunky lizard. A lot of people fell in love with this very quickly. But then there was the new sort of raptor type, the small monster, the Canodath, which use their heads like blunt hammers to slap. And they seem to actually engage with the monsters, helping you attack them if they're vulnerable. There was another environmental trap revealed or properly shown now. This one that's clearly more of a man-made mechanical trap. The timing looks a bit tough from watching the gameplay though. It seems you first need to attach the mechanism on the top by firing and aiming at it, and then you have to press a follow-up button to sort of release and activate it. So I do think a lot of people are going to miss this based on what I was seeing from this gameplay. A lot of people were missing it. There does appear to be a flash bug in front of it to help delay the monster, but the only one I saw successfully land was by a player using a trap first, so we'll see. The very next day though, on January 8th, we did have Beta 2 announced, with Gypceros revealed, and a mystery monster coming in for that Beta 2. I do think this is unfortunate because they announced that the beta will be based on the same old performance and old weapons lineup, and people might misunderstand and think, say, I thought you were working on optimization, why is it as bad or the same as it was before? So while they're doing a nice thing to let people play and those that missed the beta get a second chance, I just think that's going to be an unfortunate aspect of it. In regards to the monster then, Gypceros, it is a returning bird wyvern, using a mix of blinds and poison and trickery as well. It's somewhat of a flashbang monster, and it has a funny moveset using an elastic tail that can stretch for better range. They also teased its silly fake death trick too, so I think it's going to be a funny one to have back in the game. Either way, in my opinion, that second mystery monster will need to be one that fits into the Windward Plains, and from what we've seen, that could be something like Cumatrice, who's been shown there, or something like Rathalos that was teased since the first trailer for the game. And in the beta, we did see that there was a hidden nest completely unused high up in that region, so a flying wyvern type, that would work too. Still, we're going to expect to hear more about that on the 4th of February. Moving forward, we had the January 9th interview talking about evolving Monster Hunter, where it has some great perspective on what made it a hit and what felt right at the time and compared to now. In that interview, they talked about things like the fact that World was a major turning point, at least in the opinion of the devs. At that time, the market was full of competitive multiplayer games, mostly shooters, so something like World or Monster Hunter in general, it was very different to that and hadn't had a big success in the West yet. So they went back and considered what makes Monster Hunter so fun and special to try and highlight that core while updating everything around it to be more approachable. At that stage, they also put together a strong habit of feedback and communication, especially more with the Western fans, understanding what they liked and didn't like so they could take it seriously compared to just blindly doing things. And with that, they feel that it's made a major impact on how they design stuff and how they respond to feedback. Then, after World's success, they felt a lot more certain about what is special about Monster Hunter, and of course their ability to maintain and improve that. With World's final updates ending, that's when they began to test available technology, predicting the next gen of consoles and hardware would be out and established by the time Worlds would be going. So at that point, they started to consider what would be possible with newly improved technology. This led them to make many advances in terms of seamless gameplay, from say the way the quest system works, the way you connect to the world, even down to the details of cooking. The seamless concept led to the much bigger locales, and ones that are physically connected to each other so you could go between them without a loading screen. Not to mention the details and changes from monsters, the new weather system and all the subtle stuff. And they say in this interview that the idea of an open world game never really was their goal. It's a tag people have started to give to the game now they've seen it. They refer more to it themselves as seamless maps and stages, so I guess they don't view it as open world like many do. And as another big topic there, they talked about making it more of an accessible game, not an easier one in particular. They have data from many players who quit World partway through, before what they called as really playing Monster Hunter. And that was an important point for them to consider when they were working on this game. Why didn't these players make it further? What was it they couldn't do? Like find the monsters, what to do when they get there, maybe it was a weapon they picked and committed to and now they're regretting it and they feel stuck. Wilds has made some big but subtle changes then to help players adjust and understand the game as it goes, also make changes where they need to. We don't know exactly what all of those things are going to be in the full game, but it sounds like it's going to be more accessible for sure. Moving on, the next thing we had was a funny one. A cooking topic in a seamless world. An interview all to do with the cooking of the game. And that was where we had the accidental Gravios reveal, if it was even accidental. Because at the bottom left on the map, you could just see the Gravios icons, as well as on-screen text in Japanese, to be fair, that said Hunter Gravios. So we don't know whether that was an accident, but it did result in basically the next day Gravios gameplay coming out. So we'll talk about that. But I do want to at least mention the cooking stuff because it is interesting. It was how you can now do cooking anywhere using the portable barbecue instead of just the barbecue minigame. How that massively changes the way you interact with the world and how long you're out there. For For example, the buffs now no longer last until you complete whatever quest you're on. They now have a timer like what we saw in the beta. That's because they want you to be out in the world more openly without going back and going through loading screens, going back to the 10 every time you finish doing anything. So with that in mind, you can cook anywhere and what you want. And they introduced a rations mechanic too. So let's say you're only ever eating one specific meal for a specific buff that uses certain resources, right? Instead of having it so you just completely run out of the resources to make that specific meal pretty quick, then they just give us rations now. And you can use those rations on anything you want, whether you're having different meals or just one over and over, it'll last a lot longer. These little subtle details that don't sound like a big deal will make a big difference for those of us who are out hunting for an extended period, meaning you don't have to go back nearly as often because of these little things. They've also introduced a totally new mechanic that's going to be important for the story and long-term play, and that's NPC relations and the feast mechanic in general. Each region has been shown to have a tribe, and that tribe seems to have some kind of thing they do in regards to cooking. What we've been shown with the Windward Plains tribe is that they use cheese and a lot of bread. So from them, you're going to be able to get a supply of cheese, but also by building up proper relations with them, you'll just get that given to you occasionally. This will then allow you to do certain meals that if you didn't have cheese for, you couldn't, accessing new buffs through building up relations with these tribes. Further, the feast mechanic is when they're going to invite you to come have a feast with them, which will provide different buffs, seemingly stronger ones, that last a lot longer than regular meals we cook ourselves. So, access to new supplies for cooking and stronger buffs if you build relations with them. So I didn't want to just skip over that, but now let's talk about the thing that happened the next day, which was the Gravios gameplay after that accidental reveal, if it was even an accident. Gravios is obviously back, and man, he is big. And confirmed in the interview in regards to this, Gypceros will not be back in Wilds. And that's interesting because Gravios wasn't in Rise, but now we're not getting Gypceros in Wilds. They've talked actually about how they choose monsters and why, and in the case of this choice, they want each monster to serve its clear purpose and be a bit more unique. I like the idea that they're not having overlapping monsters that have similar mechanics and designs and function, because they only have so many slots to give, so much time for development. I'd rather each monster stand out on its own, so I appreciate that choice. And then in regards to Gravios, it's Wilds. We have new mechanical changes here. A big thing is the focus mode and wound mechanic, and that plays into the way they've changed this fight. Gravios is this big living rock that you're going to have a really hard time getting through unless you have, say, pierce ammo with ranged weapons, or maybe using a hammer. Basically, weapons that cut are going to have a hard time. So, with this fight, you need to be aware that it's made of rock. And during different times, it's exposed. It seems that the stomach break mechanic is back, where before you'd have to break through the stomach and the outer layer, deal proper hit zones. You break it a second time, you get really good hit zones. We've seen in this gameplay them breaking that stomach and exposing a very visual hole or cut in the stomach. And now that's like the optimal hit zone once you've done that. Using the new wound mechanic, maybe we can get through that shell in a different way than normal too. So yeah, Wilds has got them to update Gravios in terms of mechanics in regards to its outer layer shell mechanics. Pretty cool stuff, outside of the fact that we got returning attacks, where we're seeing it do AoEs of gas. Interestingly, I believe it's doing poison as well as sleep, stealing some stuff from Gypceros there. And the familiar beam attacks and explosive attacks. It's obviously got a mechanical update as well, but it's a big scary monster, the biggest one we've actually seen in this region, and I like what they've done with the mechanical update. I'm actually excited to try to fight it. Next up, on January 19th then, we had this interesting event, not necessarily tied to IGN. A benchmark tool was discussed via a German tweet, where things went a bit wrong. There was some sort of mistranslation, and so the German tweet from Capcom seemed to suggest that, yeah, we're getting a benchmark tool. But as it turns out, they're just discussing the idea of it, or at that time they were. And so that was an unfortunate miscommunication. Why I do think it's important that we do get a benchmark tool is because of these issues around the beta. Playing an old version, them doing lots of optimization, people being concerned that their rig isn't going to be able to run the game. A benchmark tool allows them to be able to check whether their rig can run the game, in what quality, on what settings, what frames are they going to get. It gives them a realistic look at the performance they're going to get so that it doesn't backfire when they buy the game. I think that's important, especially with how they're not updating the beta to be on a newer version. So it's not confirmed, but we are hopeful. Now after that, there were a few interviews about different topics that were interesting, but without any major reveals or details, just cool topics. But I want to get into some more serious stuff, like say, on January 28th, the new Udra, aka Black Flame gameplay and reveal, as well as an interview about the Well Basin in particular. So yes, new Udra, that was the name reveal of the Black Flame. We still don't know why they kept it a secret. I think it's going to be a story thing, but at least it has a name now. And it's continuing this apparent theme for the Apexes, Raidao, Orthuna, and now new Udra. Anyway, it's a new type of monster with a classification, cephalopod, which makes complete sense. But it does mean, yes, officially it's a new monster type, and so maybe in the future we'll see more like it. It's really cool. For this one though, it has a unique sensory organ, confirmed as those lights you see where the eyes are, but also at the end of the tentacles. This reveals where it's looking and who it's actually aggroed and aiming for, and what tentacle's about to attack as a little tell. It was revealed in the interview that because it has this sensory organ, it doesn't exactly have eyes, and so it's a monster that cannot be flash podded. Obviously, we also see some really cool stuff, like you hear it having really unique sounds, but also as a cephalopod type, just like an octopus would, if it can fit through a gap where its beak could fit through, it will squeeze in there. So this monster literally goes into floors and walls where there's cracks to leave the zone, or say in its nest as we've seen, there are lots in that area to use mid-fight for repositioning or maybe ambush style attacks. Not to mention those tentacles, they can all be severed apparently, or at least a lot of them, and it was strongly advised by the devs to focus on them because it's going to make the fight a lot more manageable when you actually start to sever these. It was also confirmed that they consider the apex with a main element in mind for each, so lightning for Windward Plains for Ray, water for Orthuna and the Scarlet Forest Ray, now we have fire with the Well Basin and new Udra. So we're just waiting on that cold environment. Logically, ice would tie to the next or final apex. They also talked about the Well Basin though, how they designed it with a vertical layout in mind a lot more than it might appear, where the sun touches the top, but all the mud and oil and all the gunk, it seeps down, pooling at the bottom. And because of that, in terms of heat, the lower you go, the hotter it gets. And so we expect that again to play into the mechanics of what you're dealing with down there. Subtler stuff exists, like the unique ecosystem here, all based on geothermal life sources, so monsters and their behavior, their nature, it's going to fit that theme, making them very different to the other locales, even down to the small monsters, and yes, endemic life too. All of it was visually inspired though by the deep sea with that in mind, reflected in the kind of otherworldly feel of a lot of the areas you'll encounter. So it sounds awesome. Moving forward, on January 29th, we had the very short but important topic of weapon unique designs and their new approach to starting gear. It was a big topic to do with the Hope set and how it was much more involved as a starting set in terms of the concept. How it's meant to represent an experienced star hunter rather than a beginner hunter as we've seen before. It was said that they spent more time developing this set than any other starting set they've ever done, and actually a lot of the sets and equipment in Wilds as a whole. The way they managed to get this long coat working, with a hood and hat, and they said that this set should visually fit in context of the story at all points. So if you're wearing it at the end, it would fit, it would still make sense. I think overall they did a fantastic job with it. It feels very iconic for the game, so I think whenever you see this set, you're just going to think Wilds. But within this, they also referenced weapon designs, and obviously World, that was a big topic, where monsters had really underwhelming weapons. Like just parts of a monster slapped onto a stick. Really disappointing stuff, a meme in the community for a long time. And with this being kind of quote-unquote Worlds 2.0, there were a lot of concerns that they might bring that back. They confirmed in this interview that each weapon has a completely unique design, and it seems they're very aware of that negative feedback and they've done away with it. So yeah, awesome to hear. It was the very next day then, January 30th, that we had Monster Hunter announce its next trailer, and official reveals coming on February 4th. Here we expect the reveal of the next locale, which again, logically going by other Monster Hunter games and the details we already know, we're expecting it to be a cold environment, and so the Apex will logically be linked to that element. We're also going to get new information about Beta 2, and probably whatever that mystery monster is. And while that brings us almost to the end, IGN did release a final roundup of all the information experience they had, as well as one last thing not mentioned that needs to be here in this video. The unexpected topic of two world collabs, the Witcher collab and the Final Fantasy XIV collab. Apparently because of those, elements from that experience directly affected Wilds. Firstly, that the HUD should provide the name of each attack you're currently performing. That came from the Final Fantasy XIV collab with Yoshi P, who inspired that update. Pretty incredible because it's something I've appreciated for the purpose of understanding new weapons and making videos about it myself from the beta. It helped me spot new moves that the weapons have, or returning moves, understanding which combo goes into which move, and in particular when watching other people play, it helped me understand what they're doing right now and why, especially in the context of watching the speedrunners to kind of glean knowledge for myself. So it's actually been one of my favorite tiny updates in Wilds, and I had no idea it was because of the collab with Final Fantasy XIV in World. Apparently Yoshi P had said to Tukada at the time that players really appreciate being able to see the name of an attack right as they do it. So for the behemoth fight back in World, you could see sort of boss moves on screen as a warning, unique for that fight, and it seems that inspired its introduction full on into Wilds, so I think that's great. On the other hand, we also have the Witcher collab. Apparently, this directly inspired the dialogue options we now have in Wilds. We've seen in various examples of different NPC interaction that you can go well beyond the main topic and ask different questions. It was Tukada who brought up the Witcher collab in relation to that. Apparently, it served as a test to see how players would react to having more dialogue options in general. Geralt in that collab had conversations with different characters, and in that you get to choose dialogue options. This, when compared to the player's hunter character, who never says anything, certainly not having dialogue choices, was different. And now in Wilds, we not only have a voiced character, but yes, options for more in-depth conversation if we want to explore that. Apparently, Tukada explained that while the Witcher collab was well before anything Wilds, it's something he took into consideration and seriously at that time, so he could finally follow up on it for the full game of Wilds years later. So, pretty cool to hear about the results of 2 special collabs. I'm hoping we see more like that in the future of Wilds. Even if it was again more Final Fantasy and Witcher stuff, that'd be awesome. But they'd probably do something different, I guess. But yeah, there you have it. That's my overview of some of the bigger topics and details that came out from all the IGN stuff throughout January. It was surprisingly detailed and varied, from big topics to even less expected stuff. We've learned a lot. On the 4th, again, we're going to get new information about Beta 2 and probably the launch, I'm sure. So expect more coverage leading up to that. For now then, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.